We see it.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. My name is Mitch Long. It's a pleasure to be in front of you guys today. Always love these grant processes. We got a lot of them going on, but I'm really excited to present to you this opportunity that has come across our desks, and it's an exciting conservation project called the Thorp Reach Acquisition Project. And don't worry, we'll come up with a cooler name. The last property we came with you guys, we called it the Upper Yakima Floodplain Protection, but now we call it Cottonwood Cove. So we will come up with a cooler name as we move forward. So this project is on the main stem Yakima River near Thorp. It's approximately 235 acres and it contains over 1 mile of river frontage. The property consists of 9 separate contiguous parcels that contain about 70 acres currently in irrigated agricultural production, and about 165 of those acres are of riparian forest, ponderosa pine, wetland, and open space. The goal for this proposal is to acquire fee title of the entire nine parcels, or 235 acres. So the other thing to note, 100% of this property is within the boundaries of the 100-year floodplain. Although there are some areas that are in the 500-year floodplain because of human modification. But we've been working with the current landowners for several months, and we're currently going to be beginning negotiations to secure an option agreement for the purchase of the property. And what we're doing right now is trying to find adequate funding to actually move forward with that purchase. We are a local land trust within Kittitas County. Our boundaries in the Upper Yakima Basin, and we've successfully negotiated floodplain acquisition projects on the Yakima River and Kittitas County in the past. The objectives are simple to state, but there's lots of work to be done to acquire property like this, or any property. But we do know the process and we feel we can successfully implement this project if we can find adequate funding to move forward. Following acquisition, KCT would prepare and implement a management plan for the property that follows RCO requirements and follows Land Trust Alliance standards and practices for best management of conservation lands. The management of the property would also allow for the exploration of restoration opportunities found on this large piece of floodplain. And it's kind of exciting to think about some of the potential restoration that may be there and that would become available with successful acquisition on such a large piece of property that is entirely within the Yakima River riparian and floodplain area. So this project is identified in the 2009 Steelhead Recovery Plan, Upper Yakima Action Number 13. It protects and restores, well, it mostly protects, but potentially restores floodplain, riparian, and in-channel habitat. It's also identified as a priority action in the January 2022 Tag Focus project list as number 22, the Yakima Floodplain Inside Channel Protection. And pictured in this was taken about a month ago. It's an active bald eagle nest on the property within the riparian forest. And the property does hold, as we'll see, a diversity of habitats that warrant conservation. After several field visits that I've taken, it's with both by myself and with some of the partners, it's apparent that there is a need to protect this land to help meet steelhead and salmon recovery goals. I keep on, clicking between things here. Limiting factors this project aims to address are mainly to limit floodplain development. But that development within the floodplains of the Yakima Basin has historically have greatly diminished the natural processes that rivers like the Yakima need to support steelhead, salmon, and other native fish species. Through the reduction of water quality and reduction of quality and quantity of habitats, loss of riparian vegetation, and loss of connection to the floodplain and hypereic zone, human development has greatly limited the salmon production of salmon species in their freshwater life history phases found in the Yakima River. So what is the real threat? It's in the floodplain. And I'll say the case study that I'd like to point everyone to is Bristol Flats. This is a development that was proposed and approved by Kittitas County through a conservation plat in 2020. It's very similar to this project in that it's bounded on the landward side by a railroad. The railroad you can see on the lower left-hand portion of and then the river is at the base of that valley wall there. And so basically this agricultural land is going to be converted into 18 new lots that will be developed. And it's going to greatly limit any potential restoration, as well as, the ability for the river to do its natural processes, as people are going to want to continue to protect their investment in that area and their property once it's developed. And development threats like this within Kittitas County, I mean, it's and development in general that we're seeing across the Yakima Basin. It should be no surprise to anyone the pace and scale of that development into our open spaces throughout the basin are happening at a rapid rate. Values are going up, and we're still seeing some of the remnants of that Zoom boom. People that have through working from home in large metropolitan areas are finding that they can still work and do at the same job, but live in a place that they can look out the window and see their own piece of heaven versus the next skyrise. So, we've definitely got a real threat of development here in Kittitas County, and this property in particular has that threat. And so this is that conservation plot for a portion of the Wallace development proposal here on Bristol Flats. And so, what we're losing is not only our rural character, but we're also, this area was a privately managed boat launch area, and we're going to lose access. People will be losing access to their recreational opportunities that they've had in the past. And as well, I want to note some more community benefits that I think this acquisition of this property would help us to bear fruit. So on the left is the 1982 FEMA floodplain maps, and then on the right is the FEMA map revisions. And these, so as you can see, the railroad in the past map effectively disconnected that 100-year floodplain from the community of Thorp. And Thorp is, if you go and follow to the kind of the southeast direction where it says North Thorp Highway, that's where you start getting into the community of Thorp. You get a little bit of the school there. But as you can see, now the FEMA map revisions have placed almost the entire community of Thorp in the FEMA map floodway. And now they're having to face the realization that they need to buy flood risk insurance, and that the recognition that the railroad is maybe not as much of a flood barrier as it was. I mean, I don't know the justification behind why the map got changed the way it was, but I think what we do know is the acquisition of this property and talking with Kittitas County Public Works Flood Control Zone District. There is some real potential to do some modifications to existing dikes and levees that may be able to not only expand the river's access to the floodplain, but also provide flood risk reduction and maybe some map revisions that could benefit the community of Thorp. Our primary focus is going to be how do we make sure the river's got as much access to the floodplain as possible, but knowing that we have things like the railroad that we're not going to be able to move, can we do things on the floodplain that could at least give us a greater expanded area for the river to have access to that floodplain for fish and wildlife benefit? But we also think that there's going to be some real tangible benefits, particularly for the community of Thorp, if we're able to do just that. And so this is a relative elevation map, and it demonstrates that there were likely active channels within the property prior to development of dikes, transportation, and agricultural infrastructure over the last 100 years. And this project, it was in that reach with that was studied by Mid-Columbia in their Cottonwood assessment. And I think, looking at some of their assessment of restoration potential, this was in the higher reaches. This was some of the most had the most potential for actual restoration for riparian forests and reconnecting active and reactivating the floodplain where it's currently not. But of course, conservation is the first step to being able to look at and exploring those ideas in further detail. We're seeing KCT has a history of working with landowners, conserving property prior to doing restoration on a grander scale. I would point everyone to the Clay Elum River restoration. It took conservation easements that KCT holds to be able to have the ability to do such a wide scale restoration of river and floodplain processes to the extent we could there. Similarly with the Hunley property, that was a large scale acquisition of conservation easement. We don't hold it, but we negotiated that deal. Department of Fish and Wildlife holds that, but it also helped us generate good relationships with the landowner and also the capability of doing some significant restoration work on the property that was supported by the Department of Ecology, and the design work was supported by Surf Board. And lastly, I'd just point everyone to the Shockey restoration that is ongoing downstream here, and again, you've got a project that is providing flood risk reduction, fish and floodplain and habitat restoration work. So it really kind of takes that first step of being able to acquire enough property within the floodplains to really be able to get some of those more significant restoration projects done to help really move the needle on salmon recovery goals. So I did mention some of the dikes. These are highlighted on the property. Here on the top one, you can see Hutchinson Dike. That is, the weird squiggly line on the property that went off into the river. You might be saying, what's that? Well, that really, the parcel maps are not necessarily accurate from the county, but that represents the dike itself, and that is owned by the Hutchinson family, as well as a bank stabilizer that was built by the Civilian Conservation Corps, and then the Mills Dike, which was also constructed by the Hutchinson family, and I think that kind of followed shortly after a landslide that happened on the opposite bank of the valley. And so what we'd like to do with upon successful acquisition of the property is looking at those things, and do we have the ability to make some modifications to those dikes to be able to improve access to the floodplain with the river, create off-channel habitats, as well as really create more of an active floodplain that could help support a more sustainable riparian forest ecosystem. And of course, we as a land trust, this is a Surf Board proposal, but we're also looking at some of the other important conservation values on the property. And you can see on both these maps that word squiggle that goes in the river at the top of the property. That's actually the levee that's along the bank. So if you actually shifted those parcel maps down, you'd be able to, that would make more sense. But the on the map on the right, this is showing some of the priority habitats that DFW has determined. And this Columbia Basin foothill riparian woodland and shrubland, which takes up a majority of the project, that's actually one of the most critically imperiled habitats as identified by DFW, risk of extirpation due to the loss and degradation of that habitat. And then the map on the left really demonstrates the amount of wetlands that and various types of wetlands that are found on the property. So even in its current configuration, this property supports a diversity of habitats, and those habitats have a direct link to the recovery of salmon. And it's those types of habitats, wetlands that produce water quality and other insects and invertebrates for food in the food base, as well as healthy riparian forests. Those types of habitats. Even if we weren't able to do anything, this still has a high conservation value for fish recovery, in our opinion. So there is, I mentioned that agricultural production does currently happen on the property, about 70 acres. There's also evidence of past activities on the property, mostly agricultural and gravel aggregate mining. One of the family members, past family members, was the person that started Ellensburg Cement Company. And so there is some evidence of some gravel mining, although those and other types of clearing and grading activities associated with mining and dike and levee construction. So, you know, we're going to be the only real active structure on the property is a cabin that was placed there that can be, the family has it on skids so they can, and they want to move it. And we're also going to continue to work and negotiate with the landowners to see if we can get as much of the old equipment and things like that that's on the property removed from the property prior to acquisition. So our timeline is, if successful with getting surfboard funding, we're going to begin appraisal and due diligence. You know, and through that will go through 2023, and with the goal of having transfer of title and closing of the property by December 31st, 2023. And then from there, we'll be looking at early spring doing a baseline reporting, and then drafting a management plan for the property. At the same time, we'll begin to work with our partners, including the Flood Control Zone District and others, to really kind of understand what kind of assessment needs do we have to understand what the real restoration potential of the property is, and also identify if there's other things, other property owners adjacent to this that we should be working with, such as the downstream landowner, which is also a number of parcels, but it is just one single landowner. So there is some opportunity, we think, to be able to work with that landowner to see if we could even get a broader restoration project done, if maybe even work to secure a conservation easement or other potential acquisition in the future. But right now we're going to focus on this one because we've got the opportunity with the landowner. So this is an expensive property, given the large size. We're estimating it to be over just $2 million. You know, we also are looking at about 117 or so to do the due diligence, and a lot of this is going to be wrapped up into doing environmental assessment. Also, we want to do a wetlands delineation. We want to do cultural resources, and so that would help us facilitate future restoration planning, as well as looking at potentially doing some boundary line adjustments and survey work. The boundary line adjustment would be if we were unable to secure the full amount of funding we need for the purchase of the entire 235 acres, we could potentially break this project up into phases to help move the project forward. And that's one of the things that we're in the process of negotiating with the landowner at this point as well. But our total PRISM project budget is $889,583, of which we're asking for $550,000 to be funded through Surfboard this year. That would be about 25% of the total amount. We're currently, I'm got WWRP riparian grant that's going in for this project as well. That application is due on Tuesday, and so that would actually cover 50% of our project costs, and then we'll be looking at other sources to help round out our total amount. But you know, I think the big thing that would help us is if we do get support from Surfboard, that really kind of shows the other funding sources we're going for, that at least locally there's broad-based support for this project, and should warrant further or hopefully warrant rankings that are higher in other categories like WWRP that we'd be going for. That animation didn't work out very well. So anybody have any questions?
Bob says in the chat, will this acquisition result in improved public access and recreation use?
So I'll go back to, it will. So currently there is no public access on the property. But the issue that we're going to have is there's going to be an easement that will be in place to access the property from the landward side. So the property is bounded all the way on this whole eastern boundary on the landward side by railroad and BNSF lands. But currently there's a boat launch upstream and a takeout downstream. And right now there's signs along the bank that say this, you don't take out here. But you know what we're proposing is if there are floaters that are coming down, they wanted to stop, have a picnic, throw a fly around in some of the areas, they could stop on this bank. So that's where the public access would be coming from. It's just the big issue is, you know, the easement that would have to be negotiated. There's a fee every year you pay to Boise for that easement that currently exists, and it allows for a certain amount of vehicle traffic, and we wouldn't be able to increase that without a higher cost to the landowner, which would be KCT. And it's just not something we're really looking for. Plus these private parcels here between the highway and the railroad, they don't necessarily want to have public accessing that way. So, which is understandable. Thorp's a pretty quiet community and pretty close-knit community, and we definitely don't want to make the neighbors mad. We want to be good neighbors to them.
Say, Mitch, what's the rules on taking agricultural land out of production?
I don't believe there are any rules to taking agricultural land out of production. It's private property, and they're selling it as private property. We've explored and we continue to explore the potential for maintaining agricultural use on this property. The one thing that our board has identified as a key concern, though, is we do not want, we want the railroad to be the place where we defend for flood risk. We don't want that agricultural land. We've seen a lot of agricultural lands when flooding happens, they do things that don't necessarily help out river and floodplain function. And so that's, you know, we're still considering the potential for maintaining agricultural production. But at this point, we're probably considering more of the returning that into riparian forest ecosystem.
Sean asks, are there water rights associated with the acquisition?
No, well, currently the water that is used for irrigated ag here is from the West Side Irrigation Canal, so it's leased water. So there is no other water rights associated with the property that we've been able to find to date. And I've been working with Justin at Trout Unlimited to do some investigation and seeing what potential's there and what value may be there as well.
Thanks. Becca asks, how did you determine the cost of the land?
That is, at this point, that's my best guess estimate. Looking at different values around. I mean, I think it would be worth a lot more if it was broken up into those 20-acre parcels and really set up for development. But there's a pretty big cost with doing a plat like that, and the landowners are just looking at selling. And so that's my best guess estimate. I am working with others. Hopefully I'll be finding out soon, getting some more market evaluation to see if I'm close to the mark or not.
Great. Is there time for one more question, Mitch? I know you have something right after this.
That's okay. I'm actually going to be working on a floodplains by design grant. Melissa's going to that meeting, so
okay.
I'm not as time crunched as I was.
Okay. Probably make this the last question anyways, just so people can get their lunch. But is this timberland and now for county tax purposes, and will that be maintained?
Currently it is resource land. It's not timber. The whole thing is open space ag.
Okay, awesome. Well, unless there's any really critical questions, we can handle those offline. Thank you very much, Mitch.